Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook, the COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our HCMx Radio podcast. I'm excited to be here today with Claude Werder, our Senior VP of HCM Research from Brandon Hall Group. Hi, Claude. How are you doing? Great. And also with us, I'd like to warmly welcome the founder and CEO of Healthy Leaders. For over 35 years, we have Bob Rosen with us. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Hi there. How are you, Rachel? Great to see you.
Great to see you again. And you've been on our podcast previously, so it's always a great discussion. And as I mentioned before, your background always brings a smile to my face. I love the combination of colors, and I think art and what you surround yourselves with is so telling of who you are. And just for all of you to get to know Bob a little bit more, as I mentioned, he's been the founder for over 35 years of Healthy Leaders. He has studied many CEOs and executives and advises large global companies and is an author of 8 books. And so I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion today about healthy leaders and healthy cultures and why it's so important for companies to focus on both leaders and their culture. And we've been talking a lot about the employee experience at work and why this is so fundamentally, or why it's fundamentally changing human strategy and people management. So, to get us started, Bob, what is new employee experience look like, and why are leaders and companies unprepared for these changes?
Well, post-pandemic, as we sort of emerge, disruption continues. We have catapulted ourselves into remote working. Technology has accelerated that. There's a rapid war for talent with the Great Resignation, and millennials are expecting very different kinds of work experiences. So fundamentally, the workplace has changed, and it's putting a lot of pressure on leaders to create that new experience. Now, here's the dilemma. Rapid change and the war for talent are creating incredible pressures on leaders at every level of their organizations. And leadership fatigue and burnout is happening at the very time that leaders need to be humanizing the employee experience. And I can talk a little bit about what that looks like in a second. And it's also happening when large numbers of leaders lack the social and emotional skills required to build and lead a diverse and remote workplace. So it's a challenging time, and the best companies will distinguish themselves on creating a fundamentally new employee experience.
Right. And the emotional intelligence is so important for leaders to have, and this isn't anything new, but even more so, the leadership style has changed. And so it is paramount for leaders to be able to be adaptable and to be able to be not just reactionary to what's happening around them, but be more proactive in a organic way. And we've done a lot of research here, in our inclusive leadership studies and our diversity and equity and inclusion studies, amongst also learning. So from your perspective, how is leadership burnout making it difficult for leaders to care about their employees? Not to mention you have, all these changes, but the changes are very challenging today, now more so than ever. So how can leaders be equipped to be able to deal with this?
Well, when you're burned out or tired or lack the skills to actually lead in a certain way, you become closed-minded. You don't have the emotional energy to step up and learn new skills. And that is happening at the very time that the relationship between employers and employees has become more humanized. And what do I mean by that? Is that people are wanting to be treated as whole people with a deeper understanding of their aspirations, their fears, their challenges, and their career opportunities. And that requires that leaders have to give forth more authenticity, more intimacy, more relationship, more empathy, and just fundamentally more understanding. One of the things that we know is that employees have 5 basic needs. They have a need for well-being, they have a need for growing, they have a need for flexibility, they have a need for autonomy or mastery, and they have a need to belong to something bigger than themselves. And the research recently has shown that caring and belonging is the #1 need that employees have. So our leaders have to be able to be more self-aware and more empathic at a time when the pressures are really great on the leaders themselves.
In fact, belonging is being added to diversity. I'm seeing that a lot more, to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, in addition to the 3 other, important areas. So it's interesting to see that come up, obviously, in our leaders. You have to have leaders that are able to create environments for, for fostering these experiences and behaviors. Claude, I know you're chiming over there, or turning your wheels.
Well, our research shows that I think most leaders really do care about their employees. What the problem is that there's, as Bob kind of talked about, they're so stressed out and they've got so many responsibilities that caring that they feel doesn't really play out in terms of how they work with the employee. They see the employee almost as this and one more responsibility they have to deal with, rather than this is really the heart of their job, is to partner with that employee and to care about them and to be flexible and help them not only do their best work for the organization, but to grow as a professional and to be able to reach their career aspirations. So I think a lot of it falls on the organization to really reemphasize to leaders that a core, really big part of their job is creating those kind of caring relationships that Bob's talking about.
Right. And Bob, let's go back to humanizing. You mentioned that, and how can leaders humanize the employee experience?
Right. Well, first off, if you think of the business case for healthy leaders, I'll tell you a little personal story. In 1991, I was flying across the country, and I was sitting next to this well-dressed businessman, and I was reading my first book, which was called The Healthy Company. And he looked over and he looked at the title and he said, "Oh, what a great title. Is it a novel?" And I realized at that time that my career was going to have lots of challenges, but plenty of opportunities. And here we sit 30 years later in 2021, and health is becoming the organizing theme for understanding our organizational life. I mean, from an individual perspective, health and well-being became critical in the pandemic. And from a team perspective, we're able to differentiate between healthy teams, healthy high-performance teams, and less effective and dysfunctional teams. And inside our organizations, we talk about the 4 agendas: the finance agenda, the marketplace agenda, the operations agenda, and the human agenda. And we actually describe each of those agendas in terms of whether they're healthy or not. So it's becoming an organizing principle. And then in the society, I mean, partisanship and polarization and all the tensions in society. We have to create a healthy society that enables business to flourish. So health is so central to our understanding. So what's the leader's primary job? To take care of herself.
Mm-hmm.
And that means being grounded and conscious. And that's how we describe healthy leaders. Are they grounded? Are their roots firmly positioned in the ground so they can withstand the stresses and winds of change? And are they conscious? Are they aware of themselves, other people, and their environment? And that enables them to adapt and respond more sensitively to people who are working for them.
And I think one of the factors is related to what Bob's talking about is I think a lot of leaders, particularly more veteran leaders, were brought up needing to have some level of control. And now that level of control is really giving way to having to be flexible. You know, I talked to an IT leader in Norway this morning who talked about, you know, he doesn't care where people work, how they work, when they work. He cares about creating value. And as long as they do that, he wants to give them the flexibility they need to be their best person. And I think that type of leader who's flexible, who's comfortable giving flexibility and trusting their employees is the kind of leader who's going to be healthier and it's going to be more productive for the organization.
I think you hit on a really important word, which is trust. Many of our organizations have been designed to protect the company from people's self-interest, of not putting in a day's work. And the really good companies and the good CEOs are recognizing that we need to trust our people much more. We need to be much more deliberate in empowering our people, pushing responsibility and authority down, and believing that our employees will do the right thing when they're given the tools and the opportunities. So I think trust is very, very important. And I think the other point that you make around control is that it's really scary for people to give up control, especially when they've had it for a long time. But the more you share and the more you share control, the bigger you get because the people underneath you get bigger. And I've always said that the leader's job is to create other leaders. And that means trusting and empowering them to do great work.
And we've talked now about why it's so important, you know, why it's so important for leaders to have these skills so that they can create these environments and the culture that can foster, you know, more healthy relationships in the workplace, more healthy decisions as far as, you know, being more adaptable and flexible to themselves as well and to the people around them. And, you know, reacting to what's in both our workplace, but also, you know, globally, economically, in our neighborhoods, in our cities. So there's just so much that whether you're a leader or an employee or a person, you know, we're all people, so we're dealing with the same issues. It's just how we're interpreting the issues and how we're reacting to them makes us different at times. So we talked a bit about the why and some of their challenges. You know, what? Let's talk about the what. And you know, what do healthy, you know, from what you see and the clients you work with, what do you see as far as a healthy culture?
Right. Well, if you look at healthy leaders and healthy cultures, they're two sides to the same coin. One, healthy leaders are really about individual characteristics and capabilities, and we need to improve those capabilities significantly to create this new caring environment. But they also have to sit inside a healthy culture, which is really the conditions and the environment that enable people to either liberate or undermine people's best selves. And so we believe that healthy leaders and healthy cultures go together. Just to go back to your initial point about the business case, if you think about what companies today need to do, they need to champion a strong purpose and values. They need more agility and flexibility and change readiness because of all the transformation going on around them. They need to create this increased sense of belonging and inclusion and psychological safety. They need to have learning accelerated and in turn accelerate innovation. They need to empower people more and create a shared sense of health and well-being with more trust, and as a result, to improve talent retention and attraction and motivation. So what kinds of people, what kinds of leaders enable us to do that? Well, as I mentioned, first off, is that they have to be grounded. And we define grounded as being masters of 6 dimensions of health: our physical, emotional, intellectual, social, vocational, and our spiritual health. And it's like a leadership system. And you're not going to be great in all of them at the same time, but basically you have to be working on all 6. And it's much like the human body, that our nervous system works with the skeletal system, that works with the cardiovascular system. So they're all really, really important. But being grounded is just one half. As I said, the other half is being conscious. And conscious is really about being aware and putting awareness in action. So the business logic goes that the more aware I am, the faster I adapt and the higher performing I am, because I need to be adaptive and agile in the workplace that's constantly changing. So we have to improve the capabilities. The other half of the equation is healthy culture. And that is happening at the very time that organizations are making sense of what are the elements of the employee experience. We know that the employee experience is about well-being, it's about learning, it's about leadership development, it's about flexibility, it's about recognition and appreciation, it's about performance management and communication and listening and diversity. The list goes on. And companies have offered them as programs or initiatives inside companies. But what's happening in some of the best companies is that all of these elements of the employee experience are being connected technologically, so that companies can take a much more holistic approach to building healthy culture. And that's a really good thing. So it's that combination of healthy leaders and healthy culture that becomes really important.
Interesting. I like your perspective, and it's kind of like the body and how it works. You know, the 6 components, they all kind of have to flow together for it to have, you know, all the functioning pieces, right?
Right. So I think research, our research and your research and the research of others, is really able to define these days the aspirational healthy culture. I mean, first, it's got to be purposeful, and leaders have to be the purpose of the firm. They've got to give people a big picture of what the company stands for, and they've got to forge a shared direction. They also have to be, as Claude mentioned, agile. And that involves changing one's relationship to change. You know, oftentimes we see change happening to us versus change happening for us. It's an opportunity versus something that we need to be scared of. But by looking at facts and busting assumptions that we bring into the workplace, we can change our whole attitude and become much more comfortable being uncomfortable, which is a critical skill in the new workplace. And you can go down the list: resilient, adaptive, collaborative, and high performing. And that really defines what a healthy culture is.
And I think where organizations have been struggling with that, though, is they talk about a lot of the things that Bob's talking about, but they're not always conducting their leadership training in ways that allows leaders to really embrace some of these things and put themselves in new situations in a safe environment where they can practice, they can make mistakes, they can feel what it's like to deal with unpresent situations. I think the best organizations that we talk to are really taking this very experiential approach and putting people in situations where they can simulate maybe their next job or the next big change that's coming and see how they work with that and see how they collaborate with others. So I think that's something that's got to evolve in leadership training.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Go ahead, you were going to say something, Rachel?
Continue. I just was going to say that, equipping leaders with tools and being able to have tough conversations and be able to ask the right questions, listen better. I've had several discussions, especially around diversity and equity and inclusion training, and and having to figure out, especially, having a conversation with someone very different from you that may be dealing with some of the circumstances of what's happening in their neighborhoods or what's happening, from city to city. So, one thing that I just heard recently, which was kind of, every time I have a conversation, I feel like I take away something and I learn from it. You don't always have to have the right answers as a leader. And you don't always, I think historically, as a leader or manager, or, even as a woman, sometimes you feel like you want to go in and fix it. And sometimes, that can be the definition of the wrong answer or the wrong approach, because you're not really hearing the person, you're not really listening, and you can be as empathetic as you can, but until you walk their shoes, you will never truly understand. And so sometimes just being able to listen may be better than even trying to provide, an answer or say I understand, perhaps, because that might even be taken the wrong way. So there's so many nuances, but I think the more that we can have these conversations and have different tips and different ways to ask questions in certain circumstances, just will help you develop those skills, will help you deal with these situations better as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, both of you are really honing in on what humanizing the workplace is all about. It's about having more authentic relationships, honest relationships. I mean, we can't create agility and adaptability unless we create learning cultures where it's okay for people to show their vulnerability. It's okay for people to admit mistakes. And we have to combine awareness with empathy. And that's going to define the humanization of today and tomorrow's workplace. And the companies who are able to do that in a caring kind of way are the ones who are going to outperform. They're going to attract great people and they're going to keep great people. And the ones who don't figure this out, who don't have healthy leaders or healthy cultures, they're going to fall further and further behind.
All right, Bob. So here's the magic question. How do we do this?
Well, I think we have to, traditionally, when we've done leadership development, we've focused on what people do. And there's a whole emphasis on skills. And those skills are good. At the Healthy Leader, we take a different approach. We basically say that if you want to create sustainable behavior change in leaders, we have to start with who people are as human beings. Are they grounded? Are they conscious? Are they mature? Are they healthy people in the broad sense of the word? And that drives their skill development, which ultimately leads to KPIs. So it's a fundamentally different approach. Rather than what you do defines who you are, it's who you are drives what you do. And we just need to do much more experiential education, much more scaled learning, much more accelerated learning in order to do that. From the culture side, the people at the top have got to champion this. They've got to create an environment for people to have deep conversations at the individual team level about what it means to work in a healthy culture and what are my responsibilities as employees, as teams, and as leaders to bring these cultures alive. And in the best companies, they're doing both. And some companies are even moving toward creating caring as the new pillar in their value set. So every company has a set of values, but suddenly now caring is showing up. So I think this is all about humanizing the workplace.
Mm-hmm. Claude, is there anything else?
Well, just to build on what Bob said, I think that more organizations are beginning to see that, but what we're also seeing is people are still focusing a lot in identifying potential leaders on performance. And we always say it needs to also be about their aspirations, about their emotional health, and a lot of the things that Bob was talking about. You need to make sure that somebody's really engaged in the organization and with their people, and that they want to be a leader for the right reasons and not just being promoted to, for a higher position or more money. And I think when organizations start looking at the whole person, as Bob said, rather than focusing so high on performance in terms of identifying potential leaders, that's when things will start getting better.
Right. The mental, the mental area too, the mental health is also, with the pandemic and with, I think a lot has come out of it with, people that were either isolated for too long or maybe had, some underlying issue but buried it in the workplace because it wasn't acceptable. And so, there's there's a lot, not just the mental, not just the emotional, but it's also, the whole holistic about who you are, the authenticity of bringing your whole self to the workplace, but in a healthy way, right? So,
Well,
to the best of our ability.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I do think, Rachel, that you're hitting a really important point, that we came out of the pandemic collectively as different people.
Mm-hmm.
We got to know ourselves. We got clear about what is important in life and what our values are. And we want to make sure that our workplaces nourish us rather than sabotage us and undermine us. And I think we're seeing the beginning symptoms and the beginning dynamics. One other thing I would say is that the human value chain in terms of how you create performance is also changing. For the last 15 years, we sort of said that if you had engaged people, they would be more effective and therefore more productive. But I think what's happening is that in front of engaged is health and well-being, is physical and mental health. And so if you don't have physically and mentally healthy people, they will not be engaged. And therefore they won't be effective and productive. So we are being smarter about understanding the human value chain inside business.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was the point of the happy culture, right?
Yes.
And it means to be happy. Everything was about happy. So, but if you're not healthy, how can you be happy? So
Right.
I think
kind of you don't have to be happy all the time.
What was that?
I said, it also means you don't have to be happy all the time. I mean, the goal of life, I don't think, is to be happy. It's to live life fully. And for people to live life fully, they have to know themselves, they have to be themselves, and they have to love themselves. And that's really the heart of being a healthy person. And sometimes it's going to be anxious and uncomfortable. That's what competition is about. But we always have to course correct to the healthy side eventually.
Well, that's a great way to end our discussion today. And this is a great discussion overall. And I really value your points, Bob. And thank you for sharing your perspectives and your methodology on, the balance of the work and culture and people, the humanization. So thanks again. And Claude, thank you also for joining me to enrich our discussion today with Bob. And until we chat again next time, stay healthy, purposeful, and mindful, and see you all very soon. Thank you for listening in and for joining us today.
Bye, everyone.